Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a well-known environmentalist and attorney who lives here in New York. His article for the June 1st issue of Rolling Stone magazine argues that Republicans stole the 2004 presidential election in Ohio. I am pleased to have him back at this table to not only talk about that article, but his view of the administration and the Democratic Party. Here's the question. I'm sure somebody must have said to you, it's over. Why are you focusing on this? Think about what happens in 2006 and 2008, not 2004.
Well, you know, it's never too late. If there was an election stolen, if there's fundamental flaws in our electoral process, it's never too late to talk about them. We should be talking a lot about them. And the problem is they were never talked about at the time. And the bigger problem is that they're going to do it again. And they've institutionalized a lot of the methods.
You are convinced that exit polls are accurate, and if the exit polls showed Kerry winning, then it was true Kerry was winning.
No, I'm not convinced that every exit poll is accurate. Exit polls, and that's only a piece of this evidence, but it's a strong piece of what should have happened.
But you seem to put a lot of emphasis on it.
I begin with this argument.
Right.
I begin showing, what happened in the election, okay? Here's the facts about exit polls. Exit polls are an exact science. That doesn't mean that you can exactly predict the outcome of every election to 1/10 of a percentage point. But, for example, in Germany, in 2 generations, the exit polls have never missed by more than 0.3 of a percentage point. It takes a week for the Germans to hand count their ballots, but every German knows on election night the results of the election because of the exit polls. Exit polls have been used in the Ukraine. Exit polls we paid for, the Bush administration paid for, to bring down a government. They have been used in the nation of Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, to bring down a government. And they're used throughout the developing world as a tool to test the veracity of elections, the integrity of the electoral process. You can say you can't predict, as I said, with complete accuracy to 1/10 of a percentage point the outcome of every election. But here we had the most extensive exit polling that has ever been done. Normally, Charlie, an exit poll on a national poll, they take 2,000 votes and they can predict it to within 1 percentage point margin of error. 2,000 votes for a national poll. There were 200,000 votes polled during this polling process. Because of what had happened in Florida 4 years before, all of the networks wanted to make sure there were no mistakes this time. They hired the best exit pollers in the world, Edmund Matovsky,
right,
who invented the exit poll. They spent millions and millions of dollars. They pooled their resources. And the exit poll showed a resounding, on the evening after the polls closed, on the election eve, a resounding victory for John Kerry. Nationally, he was ahead 52 to 48. But in 9 of the 11 battleground states, including Florida, he won, and Ohio, he won.
You believe John Kerry won Ohio and Florida?
I believe he won.
Well, if you believe in exit polls so strongly, then you should believe he won in Florida as well.
I would believe that he won in Florida as well. If all the votes were counted, I believe he won in Florida as well. By the next morning, the official tallies had come in, and the votes had shifted. And they shifted not just in one state, but they shifted in 11 states.
Because
and always there was a shift, because of voter fraud. Because people who went to the votes, and then what happened, exit polling is much more accurate than regular polling, because with regular polling, you're calling up a guy who may not even vote and asking him, what are you going to do on election day? Well, he hasn't made up his mind yet. And so there's a huge inaccuracy.
But if he walks out of the poll,
but here, a minute after he walks out of the polls and he's pulled the lever, you're asking him, what did you just do 1 minute ago? So they're extraordinarily accurate. And here, the inaccuracies always favored Bush, and they were huge inaccuracies. The statisticians who study these things say that the chance of it happening in any of the 3 states were 1 in 60 million. That is statistically impossible. So, and it happened not just in 3 states, but it happened in 11 states.
Tell me what you think is the consequence for America of the Bush presidency.
I think this is the worst presidency that we've ever had, beyond doubt. Let me tell you something. When I was a little boy, I went all over Europe with my father. I went to Czechoslovakia, to Poland, to France, to England, to Italy, to Greece, and to Germany. And everywhere we went, we were met by vast crowds of people, hundreds of thousands of people, who came out because they wanted to be close to an American politician, because they loved our country. They looked to us for leadership, for moral authority. Our country was beloved all over the world. I remember
that's true, but that also was a tribute to your father and his slain brother.
Listen, they proudly named their streets after our presidents, after Washington, Jefferson, Jackson, Roosevelt, and, as you say, Kennedy. I remember the day after 9/11, when the headline on the biggest newspaper in France, Le Monde, was, "We are all Americans now." It took 230 years of disciplined, visionary leadership by Republican and Democratic presidents to build up those vast reservoirs of love, of leadership, of moral authority among all the peoples of the world. And in 6 short years, these people in the White House, through monumental incompetence and arrogance, have drained that reservoir dry. And we are now today, America is the most reviled nation on earth. There's 5.5 billion people on this planet who fear and hate the United States. And for me, that is the bitterest pill to swallow, because I saw the hope for American leadership in the faces of those people that I saw as a little boy. And to have squandered that resource, and all the good that it would have done our country, from a commercial standpoint, from a military standpoint, from a national security standpoint, to have squandered that with absolute incompetence and arrogance, to me, is one of the most criminal acts in American history.
There's so many ways to go on this, but let me just stay with this notion. Your uncle, Ted Kennedy, voted against the war. How many senators voted against the war?
I forgot.
Maybe 15, I think. Maybe Russ Feingold. But what do you say about those senators who supported the war, who had an opportunity?
Okay. Listen, John Kerry sounded like he was obfuscating or being pusillanimous when he said,
"That's cowardly."
I voted for the war, or obfuscating. I voted for the war, and I didn't vote for the war.
Right.
In fact, the senators who voted, Teddy thought they Teddy thought they were all wrong, and I thought they were all wrong. And I think anybody who couldn't see how wrong this war was 10 miles away and see it coming, that their whole leadership is in question. However,
and has forfeited their.
Well, let me just say this: that vote, these senators were not voting for the war; they were voting for the president, the authority he requested, to give him the ability to say to Saddam Hussein, "I can declare war. I can go to war with you any day."
I have the Senate behind me.
Right. So that and knowing that Saddam Hussein was a brinksman, and that he was not going to tell the truth until he was on the courthouse steps, until the 12th hour had told,
or until the troops were in the region.
Right. Bush had to have the capacity to walk right up to the brink in order to get him to
But you just said that your uncle saw the difference and didn't think he should give him that authority, and these other Democratic senators, they didn't have that.
And I think that was not a matter of exercising wisdom about whether the war was right or wrong, but exercising a judgment about the character of the president. And I thought Teddy knew that this was a president who was not interested in negotiation, that he was going to take our country to war. And he knew that this war would be a disaster for our nation.
John Kerry said it was a wrong vote. He voted wrong.
Right.
John Edwards said he voted wrong. Hillary Clinton has not said that.
I think that's a mistake. I think she's making a terrible mistake. And I think,
And forfeiting an opportunity to be the nominee of the Democratic Party, if she continues to say that?
I think Iowa is quicksand, Charlie, and that the people who come out and vote in Iowa are going to be are the most highly motivated Democrats, and among that contingent, people despise this war. They see it for what it is, and they are way ahead of the politicians on it. And I think that political leaders who want to be national leaders in the Democratic Party are going to have a really hard time if they're not very, very clear about this war.
And do you believe if somebody had been articulating the lines, the arguments that Howard Dean was articulating, but did not have some of the other elements of his performance and behavior, might have won the nomination and beaten George Bush?
Well, I think that
somebody had not had a voting record and could take the issue of the war.
Let me say this:
Bush,
I think that
notwithstanding whatever election fraud you think there was,
because I think that the national attitudes about the war have evolved since then.
Since 2004.
Yeah, very much so. I think that
because of disclosures about intelligence information.
There are a lot of both Democrats and Republicans who just said, "We're at war. We're going to give the president the benefit of the doubt." At that time, and the president was reassuring. It hadn't come out that the Downing Street memos, all the level of deception, and also the kind of the intransigence and the hopelessness of our present situation, which I think is clear now to everybody, and the press is finally covering it. You had a very tame press. I mean, the White House press corps, was absolutely abysmal. They're stenographers for this White House. They should should just drink the Kool-Aid and do us all a favor by disappearing and letting somebody cover the White House who does what the press is supposed to do, which is to stand up to power and to ask questions and to be skeptical.
So you think the White House correspondents of all the networks just simply capitulated to power and did not report stories that might have been that if they had CIA sources and if they knew the intelligence was wrong? I mean, I don't think they asked.
I think time and time again they failed to ask the obvious questions that should have been asked. And in fact, the New York Times, which is perceived as a liberal journal, and the Washington Post have had to publicly apologize for the coverage of the war. And they were among the more skeptical.
Wait. These are specific instances in terms of the New York Times and whether it should have known more in terms of some of the reporting about weapons of mass destruction.
What?
There's not no, Bobby, there's a difference here. There's not a broad-based, saying all of our coverage of the events leading up to the war was bad and we're apologizing for it. There were specific instances in terms of certain reporting about weapons of mass destruction.
I don't know that,
Judith
Charlie.
Miller and other instances.
But those were the central questions of the war. We were told we're going to war to prevent this harm to the United States. And that was at that time, that was the fulcrum for the White House's argument about why we should go to the war, that there was a clear and present danger that could not wait.
All right, tell me what the profile of the Democratic candidate in 2006 ought to be. In other words, should it be somebody that was right on the war, like
Are you asking
I'm asking if Barack Obama, who was against the war from the beginning.
Are you asking me, from a strategic point of view, or who I
both?
Prefer?
First, you personally, because I think what I've shown and what you've felt passionately in not only here but in other places is your sense of what you think the administration, where it's led America in terms of its reputation around the world, in terms of disaster to human resources as well as financial resources in the country, and its reputation and its relationship with other countries. You made that point. That's your own personal feeling about this. But do you think strategically that who, with that point of view, satisfies for you the profile of what a Democratic candidate in 2008 ought to be?
Well, I think rather than describing a particular person, I would describe
I said
the
profile.
qualities that they should have. I think that they should have the capacity to speak to all the American public, Republican and Democrat, without compromising their own values. And I'll tell you how you do that. By talking about populism, by talking about the direction this country is going, which favors an economic elite and a corporate elite. And the Republicans have been able to win again and again by appealing to this core of populism that the American public have. And what they've done is they've said, look, you have these Hollywood liberals who have driven the decline of American values, the things that you care about American. It's a very appealing argument because Alex de Tocqueville described this, that we are a populist nation, that we naturally fight against the elites or are antagonistic towards elites, and particularly elites that challenge our basic values. The Republicans, people like Karl Rove have been ingenious about painting, Barbara Streisand and her coterie of, Hollywood liberals as the people who are driving the decline of values. What Americans, I think, are beginning to understand is that the reason that we have Desperate Housewives on TV and all this profanity is not because of Barbara Streisand. It's because of Wall Street. Because Wall Street is selling pornography to the American people. And that the declines that you see on television...
Well, how is Wall Street selling pornography to the American people?
Listen, why do you think that on the news, on the nightly news every night, you're seeing Brad Pitt and Angela Jolie and Michael Jackson and the Duke lacrosse team and Monica Lewinsky, rather than, the stories we ought to be reading about, Ken Lay and global warming and, all these questions that should have been asked about Iraq. People today, most Americans know more about Brad and Angelina than they do about global warming. The reason for that is because we abolished, Ronald Reagan in 1988, abolished the Fairness Doctrine, got rid of the obligation that the broadcasters, that the airwaves be used to promote the public interest and advance American democracy. So the broadcasters who run these networks now no longer have an obligation to promote the public interest. Their only obligation is their shareholders. They promote that obligation not by telling us the difficult stories and news that we need to understand to make rational decisions in a democracy, but rather by entertaining us or amusing us, by selling us pornography or appealing to the prurient interest that all of us have in the reptilian core of our brain for sex and celebrity gossip and fear. And that's what they put on TV every night, rather than putting the really difficult stories about how your Social Security check is disappearing because we're loaning all this money to China. And, what's really happening to the national debts and what's happening to the national deficit and what's happening to the industry in our country and how the destruction of the unions and the destruction of the American middle class has caused this wave of immigration. And people don't understand these issues today. If they did, they would vote rationally. The problem is that they don't. And the reason for that is not because Barbara...
And if they voted rationally, they'd vote Democratic, or what would they vote?
They'd vote for people who were going to support their financial interests, as well as, the values that really matter in our country, rather than, voting for people who are attacking their economic interests and their values, their fundamental values.
Robert Kennedy, there's an article about the election in Ohio in 2004, his commitment to the environment, what he's done for Riverkeepers and so many other organizations, speaks for itself.
Thanks for having me.